Swimming like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Welcome back to another episode of the Shrimp Tank. We come to you virtually from Seattle, and today we're up and down I-5 from Vancouver all the way to the Bay Area. Listen, if you want to learn how to start, grow, or run a successful business, and we're going to find out today how to make more revenue, this right here is the podcast for you. I like to call it the podcast of record. It's where street smarts and book smarts collide. Hello again, everyone. I'm Dan Whedon, and my co-host today is Linda Popke, who is residing in the Bay Area. Our guest today is Jenn LeBlanc, CEO and founder of ThinkResults up in the Vancouver area. For 2 decades, Jenn has been launching companies and delivering leads and revenue growth for companies of all sizes, including small company we call Microsoft, Intel, and hundreds of life sciences and tech startups. To date, her work has delivered over $2 billion with a B in new revenue to clients. She is also the founder of Changing Tides Movement, a community organization that is dedicated to driving massive amounts of capital into the hands of women. Welcome, Jenn. We will be right with you. Excited to talk with you. Everybody, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, YouTube. You know what we are, Linda, right? What are we?
We are ubiquitous.
We are ubiquitous. We come to you from a whole bunch of cities around the country, including Atlanta, Boca Raton, Charleston, Dallas, a whole bunch of different places, but we think we're the favorite one. So, hey, everybody, thanks for joining us. Welcome, Linda. It's good to see you again.
See you, Dan.
Hey, I had an interesting thing happen to me today. I'm sure that shocks you. A couple of years ago, I purchased right after COVID hit. I decided I was going to take my own advice and invest in good office furniture. And I went to Office Max or Office Depot, I don't remember which one it was, and bought a really nice ergonomically sound chair, very comfy, very nice, very pretty, all of that. And it's just only been about 2 years. And recently, I guess it's the hydraulics. It's starting to kind of give way, and it seems more and more. So this morning I'm on a Zoom call with a client, and I twice had to excuse myself because I felt, radio can see me doing this, but I felt like I was in the principal's office, getting deeper and deeper into that big chair sitting across from them, where you get lower and lower. I had to twice say, excuse me, I got to lift myself back up again. Are these chairs supposed to last longer than 2 years, or is this me, or is it the chair?
Oh, I think it's the chair. It's not you. Of course, you did have an up and down day, right? It was an up and down day, but
it was an up and down meeting. There's no doubt about that. It was one of those that I said, I'm sorry. Because as the chair went down, I actually tried to lift straighter up so that it would counterbalance. But at some point, I felt like I was sitting on the floor.
You know what? It was actually a feature to help you improve your posture.
You don't do that in piano chairs, do you? I mean, that doesn't happen, right?
Well, no, we do have hydraulics to go up and down, but I haven't seen them kind of happen while you're playing the piano. That would be a little weird.
That would be a little bit weird. Well, yeah. I guess this is serendipity, because our guest today, Jenn LeBlanc, on her website talks about providing incredible lift in revenues to businesses of all kinds. So, Jenn, I'm going to bring you into this silly conversation I've got. I know you can't help me necessarily with my chair, but it sounds like you're offering a great lift to your clients. Tell us a little bit about first of all, welcome to the podcast. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thank you. And, definitely it's the chair, Dan.
Oh, good. I'm glad I've got two expert opinions. It's the chair.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And certainly, I think one of the things to think about when you are launching a product, service, your company is that, quite honestly, this is a business of failure. I hate to be the downer here, but 35 to 80% of launches fail. 50% of businesses fail in the first 5 years. 92% of tech startups fail in the first 3 years. So you have to get pretty used to failure if you're in the launch business, I say. But my focus is really on, I work with a lot of tech startups. So if 92% fail, then that means that 8% are successful. So what's the difference? That has been my obsessive question for the last 20 years between the 92% that fail and the 8% that succeed. So I am a scientist by training, book smarts, I got those out the wazoo, but, trying to understand in reality, what's the difference between this group of companies and this, and it's not the product. 9 times out of 10, it's not the product. Many great products fail, many terrible products hit the market. So really that has been my personal obsession, and why I wrote that book, Launching for Revenue, was to share with the world what I had learned about how to get in that 8% and be in the winning circle.
So Linda,
Jenn,
before
if
you
it's
ask
not
your
the
question,
product-
Linda,
Go
I can
ahead.
ask a really quick follow-up, Linda. And so if I'm hearing you correctly, I just want to get my math right. 90-ish, about 90% of startups in tech fail, and 90% of that doesn't have anything to do with the technology. It's more about the people.
It's the people, it's the positioning, it's
Right.
all the things that surround the product. Now,
Got it.
I will say there are definitely some products that have failed because they just didn't work and they didn't achieve the desired outcome, whether it's a biotech solution or it's a high-tech solution, right? But it's not a case of, I'm going to build a product and everything's going to be fine. That is not smart thinking.
So and we know it's not if you build it, they will come, because that doesn't happen. But what is it that you have found in that 8%? What are some of the gems you could find that we could pass on to the audience in terms of, if you do these things, you're more likely to be successful?
I think there's several things. So I'm just going to touch on a couple of them, but one of them that I think is sort of an overarching concept is deep customer intimacy and empathy. I think when you really understand the problem of your customer, and I have a process that I work with clients to get them literally like they are standing inside their customer. They understand what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what they're saying to other people, where they're going for information. When you can, and what they're struggling with, then everything sort of flows from that place. I think that's a good overarching, very simple to remember. Like when you're stuck, what are you trying to solve? What is the customer currently doing? And how is what you're doing going to change their life? Because often people focus on the competition, but your biggest challenger is the do nothing option. So I think that's one thing that's really important. Just a quick second one, I think a lot of times when I look at, because I'm often called in to do a relaunch of a product that has not met its targets, positioning. That's the biggest problem that I see, the positioning. And that starts with understanding your customer. That positioning is not landing. They're like, wait, we don't understand it. I don't see how that's going to help me. It's too much trouble. All of these sort of internal conversations are happening in your customer because your positioning is not landing for them. So start with the customer, get that positioning right. And I think if you get those two things right, again, the rest of it is a lot easier.
So Jenn, as I was listening to you talk a little bit about, understanding and being empathetic of what your customers' needs are and their pain points, and anybody who's ever been in sales has heard that. I maybe you've noted this too. There are some customers that actually aren't really sure. They can't define it. They can't verbalize it. They don't know. And that's part of the problem. They don't know what's wrong. What's some tools, tips, techniques that you're helping your clients to help uncover that?
Absolutely. And I make this joke with my engineering husband regularly. If you told somebody, 100 years ago, I'm going to build a form of transportation that is metal, that goes in the sky, you're going to put a seatbelt on, we're going to go 30,000 miles an hour, you'd go, no, thank you. No, thank you. I don't want that. Right? I don't want to get to New York in 4 hours. Not that way. Right? So I think you have to listen to your customers, but you also have to realize that they're coming from their perspective. And that's where your genius comes in, is when you've spoken to many customers, even if they don't know what the issue is, they don't know the solution. They usually know what the issue is, but they don't always know the solution. Right? But really understanding what that issue is. Intuit does this great program, I think they still do it, called Follow the Customer Home. Sounds kind of creepy, but they actually have followed customers when they first developed their personal accounting software. They went to customers' home and watched them, balance their checkbook and see how painful that process was. They do this in a business perspective. They will go into businesses and say, okay, show me how you're managing your invoices and your cash flow. Like they literally will just sit and watch. They say nothing. It's kind of creepy, but it's fabulous because they are actually, again, I'm a biologist by training. This is field research, right? You are watching the animal in their native habitat. What do they do? Where do they go? Oh, God, I don't know how to solve this problem. And then they just kind of push it under the rug, and where they're doing those kinds of behaviors, that's where your gold mine is, where they're just going, ugh, solve that, make that, remove that pain point for them. And they may not verbalize it to you. You got to watch them. You got to get close.
Jenn, I want to take this in a little bit different direction because you have done an amazing amount of work with female founders and you started this Changing Tides movement. Talk a little bit about this. I know that there's been issues with female founders getting funding for great ideas, great companies that perhaps a male founder would be able to get funded. So talk to us about that.
Definitely. And, the statistics, again, are depressing. I'm a data person, so I start with statistics, but 2% of female founders get funded. If it's a woman of color, it's like 0.002%. It's just insane. And like 20% for mixed teams, and the rest goes to all male, all white teams. So it's definitely, there's a lot of bias in VC funding. And we also see that in the banking. And there are reasons for that in the banking industry and how women are going after loans or not going after loans, right? And when they do go after loans, they don't get them or they get lower loans. And there are real reasons for that. And so when I was actually in the midst of writing Launching for Revenue, like literally was writing it, when kind of the Me Too movement happened in Silicon Valley before it happened in Hollywood. And I realized that, I've been working with all these companies like Microsoft for startup and, 80% of them were male founded and 1 or 2 of them might be female founded, and working with Women's Startup Lab. And I kind of started putting it together and was like, wow, there's something here in terms of there's a lot of activity happening out in the ecosystem to help female founders and fix this, change the tides, so to speak. And so that's really where I didn't plan on that book. It completely just happened. And that's where I really started digging into some of the research around female founders and why those things are happening for female founders and how do we change that? It's a multifactorial problem, right? There's not just like one thing. It's working with the founders, working with the investors, working across the ecosystem to really change the tides.
Let me ask you about that because it feels, and this is simply my perception, that there is more awareness than there has been about that. So I think that that's a positive thing. However, this seems to be more systemic than anything, or at least maybe that's how I'm feeling, and asking you to answer, because I think that more and more people are getting to understand, this has been a problem, and we've got to address this. But there's systems in place that are keeping that from happening. Am I on the right track with that?
100%. So there is definitely a lot more awareness, and there are a lot of educational programs and things like that. But the money is not flowing to female founders, which is what is going to make the difference, right? And there are systemic issues. The research is very clear that when women are pitching, 67% of the time they get asked what's called prevention-oriented questions, which are questions like, how are you going to defend against competitors? How are you going to keep your market share? They're sort of moving you further and further away from that big visionary entrepreneur position. And 66% of the time, men get asked promotion-oriented questions. What's your vision? How are you going to grow your company? Who do you need to hire? Big thinking picture, right? Further and further into that center circle of what is a good entrepreneur. And at the end of that conversation, you have, oh, he's a great entrepreneur. Oh, she's not a good fit. And it's very subtle. I see it all the time happening, all the time. So it's something that's very subtle. I had a conversation with a corporate venture capitalist, very experienced man, very woke. He made some comments when I was talking with him about some of this research, and he made some comments, and I kind of let it go. And I came back and I was like, okay, can we talk about that comment you made about, are these real businesses? Because I'm like, that's where this starts. You've already discounted them as real businesses, so they don't even get in the room to pitch. And then when they get in the room to pitch, you're asking them very different questions. So it is very systemic. So I try to work also with the investors and just have very gentle conversations because nobody means to do this, right? They just do. But if I can gently have a conversation about, well, you asked your male founders these questions and you asked your female founders different questions and you ended up funding the male founder and not the female founder, let's talk about maybe how you might have influenced that outcome and how you might influence differently.
And we're right up against the break. One of the things, and maybe we can talk about this after, is why aren't they asking the same questions of both? I maybe I don't understand that. But one of our systems that we have to stay on top of is we got to pay the bills. So we are going to take a break to hear from today's spotlight sponsor. When we come back with our guest, Jenn LeBlanc, for our Hot or Not section of the show, we're going to ask her about broccoli. You're not going to want to walk away from that. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
I'd love to write or publish a book, but I just don't have the time. Does this sound like you? Maybe you have a compelling story to share or valuable advice for your clients and prospects. If only you could get the story into a published format. Think you don't have time to write a book? Think your writing isn't polished enough to get your message across? Think this all sounds too overwhelming? Think again. At Leverage to Market Associates, we help aspiring authors transform a great book idea into an attractive published work. If you've written most of your book, we can help edit your work and drive it through the production process. If you're not sure where to start, we'll coach you through the process to organize your thoughts and create a compelling book outline. And if you're just not comfortable writing a book yourself, we can ghostwrite this for you too. Contact us at leveragetomarket.com for a complimentary evaluation of your nonfiction book concept today and bring your book to life.
All right. Welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. And beyond today means north of the border. So I'm Linda Popke. Our guest today is Jenn LeBlanc, and our next segment is Hot or Not.
And Jenn, we love Vancouver, so we consider you part of our Pacific Northwest, of course. This is a segment where Linda and I are going to pepper you with questions about business, about life, about a lot of different things, and then you're going to tell us whether the concept is hot or not, and why or why not. People are wondering, why am I talking about broccoli? So here we go, hot or not, organic vegetables.
Oh, hot, very hot.
We did some crack research. Tell us why I'm asking you about organic vegetables.
I don't know. Probably because I started my garden. I don't know. I'm also an
something like,
scientist.
yeah, we found out that you're an excellent cook and that you grow your own I was gonna say grow your own food, but do a lot of that. Tell us a little bit about that part of your life.
Yes, so I love to cook, and certainly I'd say during the pandemic, I will freely admit that I have become an excellent cook. I'm very comfortable in the kitchen. And I think organic, I think people, as they've gotten home and they've been cooking more, I think that's very hot. I'm also an environmental scientist by training, and it's really focusing on PCBs and, heavy, very serious cancer causing agents. So I have long been a supporter of organic gardening. I think it just, especially if you grow your own, there's nothing like that tomato that is warmed by the sun. It's just, you cannot get anything like that, even from a farmer's market. Yes, they have better produce there, but picking it off and you grew it yourself and it's still warm, it's an amazing experience.
All right, well, now I'm getting hungry.
So
hot or not. So Jenn, you were born in Canada. You
Yes.
lived in the US for a number of years. You just moved back not too long ago. Hot or not when it comes to healthcare, the US or Canada?
God, that is such a hard question. So I just went in yesterday to get a medical test done, which was free, and they're going to send me the results in 4 months.
Oh boy.
In the US, I would have it today. So healthcare in Canada, if I have to choose, that's one of the reasons I moved back here. Yes, I think healthcare is a human right. Hot. I think everyone should not be worrying about how they're going to pay their bills when they just got a cancer diagnosis. You should be focusing on how to get better or how to transition out of this life. But I don't think you should be focusing on how am I going to pay for this? I just think it's unconscionable to make people go through that.
Okay. I was waiting. I thought that there was going to be a but. So I was
Oh,
waiting.
no.
No,
I mean,
that's okay.
there is a but. There is a but in the sense of, the beautiful sort of high service, because of course when I was in the US, I was, in the tech worker segment, and so I had the best of the best healthcare. My husband is in healthcare, so we had snap to it immediate service on everything. I go to getting my mammals and it was like going to the spa, right?
Yeah.
Love that part about the US healthcare system. It's very different than here.
Yeah. Yeah, that was all about trying to time out everything, and I was pausing, and now we had the pause there. So I've got another one. This is probably along the lines of when we're talking healthcare. It's more of a true or false. True or false? COVID hurt women entrepreneurs more than male entrepreneurs.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it hurt women in the workforce. They couldn't go back to work because they are still, women are still the primary health childcare provider. So you couldn't put them in childcare, so you can't go to work. I mean, I had folks I was speaking to, they're trying to work. They've got 3 kids that are, working, doing their schoolwork. They're all at the kitchen table. How the heck can you think clearly in that environment, right? So it has been a devastating, devastating impact for women, whether they're in the workforce or entrepreneurs. Although I will say that there's been a huge growth in entrepreneurship over the pandemic. And part of that is being able to kind of flex that world somewhat. But the working while the baby sleeps thing, trust me, it doesn't work. Doesn't work.
Well, I'm going another direction again. I know that you're a dog lover. So hot or not, using dogs to help vets kind of get initiated back into our environment and everyday life.
Absolutely. So you've done your research. So I am a former, I did a lot of work for an organization called Operation Freedom Paws, which provides service dogs to veterans and others with disabilities, peanut allergies, diabetes, epilepsy, seizures, that kind of thing. And it's funny because yesterday, one of my friends now, I remember when he first came to OFP, he was, the kind of folks that have like swear words on their t-shirts and like basically have a back off sort of on everything that they, and the dark shiny glasses. And I always got paired with him, and he scared me to death. Scared me to death because he was so angry, right? He at that point was barely leaving the house. And now, I run up to him and I hug him and I call him a friend. I mean, it has been, the hair is going up my neck. It has been this amazing transformation through his dog, Laddie, that really drew him out. And now he's gotten married and he's going to Disneyland and he has this full life. And before, he was like just a bundle of anger that literally just emanated from him and kind of bounced you off him. So, I can tell many other stories, but it's really quite dramatic, the difference after a couple of years of working with a service dog.
Wow, that is such a great story. I think we're all dog lovers here, and have dogs, and so we can understand them. I have Jack Russell Terriers. I think that they cause more anxiety than anything else. So I don't know if they were trained to do that. I'm not sure. They may be more angst causing, but
What I've heard, Dan, they're actually called Jack Russell terrorists, right?
Yeah, I've gone to antagonist. I've tried to avoid terrorists. So I've just said they're just Jack Russell antagonists. So, but I'm gonna kind of swerve away from hot or not, because I want to go back to the question that came into my head right as we hit break. And I found it fascinating that you talked about the defensive and defensive questioning versus the more visionary questioning. And I just know that whenever I've been in an interview situation where I've been in part of the interview team for whatever reason, one of the rules is we're going to ask everybody the same question, not even going to phrase it differently. We're just asking the same question. And I guess I don't know if I'm shocked, but I'm surprised that doesn't happen more, especially when you're talking about angel investing or loans or anything like that. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I agree. And when I'm doing interviewing and when I was in corporate, I trained all my teams. We're going to all ask, I'm going to ask these questions. You're going to ask these questions. You're going to ask these questions so that we can compare our candidates based on those, same criteria. I can't answer that question. I have no idea why that does not happen in a VC environment or a pitch environment. It doesn't seem to happen. And so that's a bit of a challenge because I'll tell you a little story about that. So one of my colleagues was in her investment committee meeting and they had 4 entrepreneurs to evaluate, 3 men and 1 woman. And they evaluated the first 2 and I can't remember the results for those 2. Oh no, they decided to invest in those 2. And then the third was the woman and they decided not to invest in her because she was a first-time founder. And my colleague, who's a woman, said, okay, time out. Those first 2 men that we decided to invest in, they're also first-time founders. How come we didn't, ding them on that? If we're going to ding her, we need to ding them on that and go back and review those. So that was the only reason they didn't want to invest in her. So they were like, okay. But if she hadn't been there to call out that difference, it would have been, oh, no, not investing in her. But it was the same criteria that they passed. He has potential.
So in that situation, and Linda, if I have just a quick follow-up on this, were they surprised that, they didn't, it wasn't purposeful is what it sounds like. It wasn't meant to be, but it just, they probably had this, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize it.
Unconscious bias.
Totally. They totally were like, ouch.
Yeah.
This is a private meeting, right?
Right.
So she was sharing it, right? But this is a big, significant investment committee from a significant institution organization. So, but they were very shocked. They didn't realize it's completely unconscious bias. They had no idea that they just, oh my God, we just did the thing.
Wow.
So, they reviewed it again. They're like, yeah, that's the only reason that we're uncomfortable with her, but it didn't bother us for the 2 guys. So we're giving her the funding as well.
I want to ask a follow-on question on that. Given all of this, if you were to talk to a female founder, what would you tell her to do to get around this? I've actually heard of women founders who bring along a man with them, kind of like just almost like the blow-up doll to be there. But that's not the real answer long term. So what would you tell them to do?
So I think that is a solution because the purpose is to get the money. I'm very Machiavellian. I don't care how you get the money. If you have to stand up your CFO, which I heard one founder, she did that for her company. She hired an older white male CFO and stood him up to do all the initial meetings. And then when it came time to sign the contract, they brought her in and they literally said, who is she? And he said, she's the CEO. And they were like, oh. They kind of struggled a bit, right? So yes, that can work. The other piece about that research, the prevention versus promotion questions, that's further in the research, and I've talked with the researcher who did this, Dr. Donna Counts, a number of times, is she also dug a little deeper and realized that entrepreneurs, we can be a little contrarian. We don't always follow the rules, right? So we as humans will typically, if you ask a question, we'll answer that question. We won't try to divert. But those entrepreneurs that diverted and took a prevention-oriented question and turned it into a promotion-oriented question raised 14 times more funding. So I teach women how to do that.
I love it. So that's, so what politicians do. You ask them one thing,
exactly.
They say, but let me tell you about this and that.
Right. So I tell them, go watch some politicians talk, and you'll see them do this. You can either answer it as asked and then divert, or you can just do what a lot of them do, and they just sidestep. They give you the message that they want you to hear. They don't like you just didn't answer that question, dude. But you can do that. Women are a little more comfortable with doing that typically, but I have them practice both of those in a safe space so that when it happens in real life, they're like, oh, okay, so I can either answer this question and then tell my big story, or I could just tell my big story. That's okay too, if I want to do that. So I get them really comfortable with that so that when it happens, it's muscle memory. They just do it.
What's interesting is that's a Toastmasters technique in table
Yes.
topics. For anybody who has ever done table topics, that was something I would often do. Is you'd find a quick way to answer very briefly even if you're saying, oh, that's an interesting thought, but let me tell you about this. So that's
Yes.
interesting. Really quick before we hit the break, a lot of people who are listening to this are small business owners, CEOs, small business owners, mid-market maybe, but somewhere in that maybe under $10 million revenue range. They're not necessarily looking for funding, but they might be, in this case, we're talking female entrepreneurs. What are some challenges that the small business owners, the CEOs who are females, what are some things that they are running into brick walls with?
So I'm going to give kind of a personal answer to that one, because I think one of the things that I've often seen working with solopreneurs and small female-owned businesses is they don't have the right home team. I'm going to be very vulnerable here, but if you don't have the right home team, and I see this all the time, I see their husbands undercutting them every time they have an idea about why that's not going to work, and if you don't have the right support system and the right home team, it doesn't matter how good your business is, because you have to have incredible amounts of resilience to be an entrepreneur. And if you're getting cut down at home, you're not going to have the strength to be able to deal with it outside the home. So I think that's really, really important. I know it's kind of a vulnerable message. And one day I'm going to write a book about that topic, because I've talked to therapists and entrepreneurs about this, and they're like, oh, there's a thing, there's a there. I think the other thing is, really going back to my first point, that customer intimacy. I mean, we talk about, a lot at Changing Tides about VC funding, but also customer revenue is the best way to grow your business. So, what is it that your customer, what's their experience as they go through the decision-making process? What's their journey, and where are they missing information? And I think just getting really deep into that can really help you with your business. And sometimes going back to it, because things may have changed. COVID changed a lot of our assumptions about everything. So you may need to go back to your positioning and go back to your customer journey. And how has that changed? And how can you better serve your customers now? I think that always works.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And the home team thing, sometimes I think we take that for granted that that's always there, but if it's not, that's really difficult. Well, our home team needs to get some love. We've got some corporate sponsors, member of our home team, so we've got to hear from them. We are going to take a short break, and when we come back with our guest Jenn LeBlanc for our famous Plead the Fifth section of the show, we're going to find out who's coming to dinner. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
Plead the Fifth is brought to you by our corporate sponsors: Ideal Life 360, Cornerstone Financial, First Underwriters Insurance, Kitsap Sun Newspaper, BC Fitness Studio, and the Upstart Group. Please visit our website at www.shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle to learn more about these terrific companies. Now, back to the show.
Hey, well, welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and the brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. And again, today we're up in Vancouver. I'm down in the Bay Area, so we got the whole West Coast here. Our guest today is Jenn LeBlanc, and our next segment, as Dan talked about, is our really famous Plead the Fifth.
And Plead the Fifth is we're going to turn up the heat maybe a little bit. We're going to keep it on the kitchen side of things, turning up the heat a little bit and asking you more questions and you only get to plead the fifth once. So if you have to plead the fifth early, then it might get really hairy. But my guess is I don't think you're a fair catcher. I think we're gonna hear a lot. So normally I ask this question, Jenn, about if you have an opportunity to sit at dinner with somebody, famous, or not, or non-famous, dead or alive, who would it be? But I'm going to switch it on you because you're such an excellent cook. You get to serve dinner at the dinner party. You're serving dinner. I want to know, who are the four guests? Who would be, maybe I won't make you do four. Who's the guest that you would want to have, famous person or significant person, dead or alive, and what are you serving?
Just one person or four?
You can pick four. You can go up to four. I'll give you a foursome.
Good, because it's hard to do just one. We had this conversation, actually. This is one of 62 questions to ask someone to have them fall in love with you, according to the New York Times.
Oh boy.
It's a fantastic article. Go read it.
I had no idea. I'm going to have to read that.
It's brilliant. It has like all these, conversation prompting questions. So my husband and I have been going through them. So this is one of them. And oh my God, this took us 2 hours. So 4 people. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Gandhi, Michelle Obama, and Mackenzie Scott.
I'm sorry, who's the last one?
Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife.
Oh, okay. And what are you serving? I want to know what your get to do. It's kind of like Beat Bobby Flay. It's your signature dish.
Okay, so normally I would serve meat because my husband's a big meat eater, but we have a vegetarian and a Jew in the crowd, so we'd have to do vegetarian. So one of my favorite vegetarian curries, which might be great to serve, is I make this sweet potato and kale. It sounds terrible, but it's fantastic. Sweet potato and kale curry, and it over rice. It's lovely. I make it in Instapot, so it's super quick, and it makes the whole kitchen smell amazing in a short period of time, because I would want to be focusing on my guests for a dinner like that, not spend a lot of time in the kitchen. So I think I'd do something like that and come up with some nice gluten-free, because my husband's gluten-free, dessert. And I know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg likes a very full glass of wine, so I would have her wine all the way to the top.
So Linda, here's what I have to somehow find a way to break into that party somehow, because everything I heard, I'm in. And I love the guests, so I'm going to have to find a way to cross the border and break into the house, I think.
You're welcome anytime.
You mean
both? I got a party crash.
You got to party crash it, and if you got Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you got to have opera on the music, because she loved opera. Yeah. So I'm going to ask you something different. You're a parent. We're all parents. All of us are parents here, and we're all parents of daughters. Dan has 2 girls too, and he's got some granddaughters. What kind of advice would you give to? What's the most important thing you could tell your daughter, or we tell Dan could tell his grandchildren about how to be successful in this male-oriented world? To be an entrepreneur? What should we be telling them?
So I tell this to everyone because it was a hard-won lesson myself, and that is, if you listen to your intuition, you will always make the right decision. Always. And so many times when I was in corporate, blah 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 in the meeting room, and I'm just like, but I didn't say anything, because I'm the younger one. I'm the only female in the room, and maybe I'm missing something. And then 2 weeks later, we would have a problem, and I'm like, oh, geez, that was what I was thinking about 2 weeks ago. So I learned to, when I get that, I have a question, to just ask it. And, it has never steered me wrong. Or decisions, should I go this way or that way? Check in with your gut. It is powerful. It knows things that you can't. I'm a scientist, but I'm also sort of a mystic. It knows things you can't nail. Listen to it.
Wow, and we could probably do a whole podcast on that type of question. I have to ask you this one though, because in the first year, where we're going to probably change, we're getting to a point we're going to change. But I've been asking all the guests, and you've probably heard this because I know you've been listening, about a hobby. And so I'm going to make you start a business based on a hobby. Maybe by now I know what it is, but you have to start a business based on a hobby. What would that hobby be, and why?
Oh, that's easy. So this island that I live on now, I lived on Whidbey, north of Seattle before this, and I just moved up here about a year ago, is called Salt Spring Island, and it's basically an artist's collective. I think I was telling you earlier, if you take, Berkeley and Santa Cruz and you smush them up and you drop them into an island in the Puget Sound, Pacific Northwest, you got Salt Spring. So everybody here has, it seems like a lot of people, there's hundreds of farm stands. Their honesty stands are at the end of the driveway, and they're selling herbs or vegetables or candles or lip balms. So I've been sampling all these farm stands, and I love to cook. So I'm like, what's missing from our farm stand ecosystem? So, kind of working on that. We don't seem to have a lot of gluten-free baking options, and I do that because my husband loves it. So kind of working on something I haven't quite settled on it, but what's going to be in we call it the Hal House farm stand. So that's my next business.
Well, Barb and I are both gluten-free, and she's dairy-free, so we'll come by the stand out for that too.
Yeah, I'm dairy-free as well, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So while we're talking about that, what would you say kind of the easiest and hardest things when you went back to Canada that you encountered, and what surprised you? Because you're Canadian by birth and you're back in Canada. What surprised you going back there this time?
I probably should plead the fifth, but I'm going to answer it anyways. I don't want to offend my Canadian, family and friends, but it didn't surprise me, but it was a nasty memory of how much this country relies on rules, processes, policies, and procedures. One of the reasons I left when I was younger was they're like, oh, you're a very promising scientist, and maybe in like 10 or 15 years we'll give you something interesting to do. And I'm like, see ya, I'm out of here. And I go to the US and they're like, oh, you put your hand up here, you take this entire department and run it. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. They're like, you'll figure it out. Very different attitude. So I had kind of forgotten that. So I came back and, I brought back my husband. And so he's an American citizen and permanent resident. So the paperwork, literally our application was 4.5 inches thick to bring him here. So that was a bit of a nasty shock. But now we've gotten through all the paperwork. We're kind of in a good place. But the first 6 months, I'm like, if someone gives me one more piece of paper to fill out, I'm going to have, commit Harry Carey. So that was hard. I can't remember was that your question?
That was a question. Yep.
Okay.
That was a good question. Yep.
I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was.
Okay. So another question let me ask you, because you talked about being a biologist, I think an aquatic biologist. Mm-hmm. How on earth do you get from being an aquatic biologist to doing marketing in Silicon Valley? Are those things related at all? I'm trying to figure out the thread of how they got together.
They are, but when I was 16, if someone said, "Oh, you're gonna be one of the top tech marketers in Silicon Valley," I would have been like, I don't know what marketing is. I don't know what tech is. I don't know what Silicon Valley is. I have no idea what you're talking about. So I often tell that when people have me come in and talk about careers, it's like, it doesn't matter what you think you're going to do now. It really doesn't matter. Just when the rocket ship takes off, get in it, put your seatbelt on, and go for the ride. So when I moved to Davis first, because my ex-husband was doing a postdoc at Davis. I thought, well, I've always wanted to do this writing thing, and I had an offer at the top limnology lab, lake studies lab, in the world with Charles Goldman, and I thought, I'm just going to do this writing thing, and if that doesn't work, I'll go back and be a lab tech with Charles Goldman. So I just started writing, and I started writing for local newspapers, the Davis Food Co-op newsletter, the Putah Creek Council, which was trying to save, repatriate the streams to have salmon runs, and wrote for Discovery Channel Online. I interviewed scientists all over the world on their research and translated that for the average person to the mere mortals to understand. And I loved it. And before I knew it, I was so busy doing that. And then I moved to Silicon Valley, and I just kind of fell into this tech job, and I'm like, I was hooked. I loved it. It's so fast paced. Every day was different. I get bored easily. It's hard to get bored in tech, and because it's always changing. And I got in the rocket ship, and I put on the seatbelt, and I strapped in, and I took off. It was not planned at all. It just landed in my lap, and I said, "This looks interesting. Let's do this." And then I was just completely hooked.
That sounds fantastic. So Jenn, thank you so much for being a guest here on the Shrimp Tank. For listeners who want to get in touch with you and learn more about you and your company, where should they go?
So you can find the marketing stuff on thinkresultsmarketing.com. And if you're interested in our community for female founders, whether you're a founder or you're an investor, changingtidesmovement.com, soon to be changingtidesmovement.org. That will be the place to go for that. But you can find me either place, and I respond to most calls. Whatever you call me.
All right. So once you've done that, make sure you check out the replays on shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle, and wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's iHeart, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, because damn, we are
ubiquitous.
And follow us on our show's social media pages on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
So Jenn, thank you very much for being our guest today. We really enjoyed having you, and I'm happy that my chair stayed lifted up the entire time. Linda, as always, thank you for joining us. Everybody, do exactly what Linda said. Go to Facebook, like us there, because that's where we live stream every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Pacific time. We'll be doing this again next Wednesday, April 13th. Our guest will be Bill McPherson from Postnet. So going to have some fun talking about that. But in the meantime, please, everyone, be safe, be well, and be prosperous, because until next week, the shrimp is back in the tank. So long.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.